Hi, everybody. Welcome. So pleased to see you all here tonight. I think most of you know me. I'm Jennifer Preston. I'm CFSC's General Secretary, and I've coordinated the Indigenous Rights Program at CFSC for a very long time. And as Kira just said, the evening is going to be recorded so that we can share it later. And there will be a link on the website that you can, and if you want to view any of the others that have happened this year, you can go to our website, to the Get to Know Thee Friend part of the website, and all of them will be there. So I know that we are all in our individual spaces here today. I am currently in Guelph, Ontario. I want to acknowledge the traditional territory of Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people. And we also want to acknowledge that CFSC's national office, which is in Toronto, is on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Petun, and more recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. And that it's also the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. And we acknowledge and respect all the Indigenous peoples that are still in this, all the various spaces that CFSC is living and working in now. We're going to begin tonight just with a few minutes of meeting for worship before we go to the main event. So I think that all of you are familiar with meeting for worship. We'll just settle for about 5 minutes, and then I'll break the silence, and we'll carry on with our evening. So I'm going to invite everyone to join me now in just a few moments of silence. Thank you, friends. So just before we get started, Kira has a few housekeeping items to share with you. So I'm going to have Kira turn her mic on and share a few housekeeping announcements.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. Just to remind folks to keep themselves muted throughout the speakers or Rob's remarks and also while Jen is speaking. And just unmute yourself if you intend to speak during the discussion at the end. I ask that the chat is open. I just ask that we keep it and all of our conversation tonight a really safe and respectful place for all. If you're having connectivity issues, I mean, the best and only advice I can give you is to try turning off your video. And if that doesn't work, try logging out and then back in. And most of the time that works. I'm not a tech person, so I can't offer you much more than that. Jen mentioned this earlier, but I'll just add it for the folks that have joined us since. But this evening is being recorded for the folks that are not able to join us tonight, and also for the Quaker archives. So if you would not like to be recorded, please turn your video off. And also, please keep your questions to the end. You're welcome to put them in the chat if you're uncomfortable, but we really like hearing directly from you. So it would be great if you could hold them to the end and ask Rob yourself. But other than that, I'll pass it back over to Jen.
Great, thank you, Kira. So I think that many of you have attended our series this year, but I will give a little introduction to it at any rate. So Canadian Friends Service Committee, or CFSC, is the service arm of Friends in Canada. And this year, in 2021, we are celebrating our 90th anniversary. CFSC came together with when there was 3 yearly meetings in Canada in 1931. And so we felt like we needed to both mark the fact that we were having a big anniversary, but we also needed to acknowledge the fact that we had been for a long time now working in such odd spaces where we couldn't visit in person with friends. So we thought, well, how will we visit with friends on Zoom? And we thought that this series of running once a month throughout the year was a good way to bring CFSC to friends, and for a good way to share some of the stories of friends who have been active with CFSC in more recent years. So that was our idea behind the series. We do have a website for the 90th anniversary, and there are stories and also lots of photos from 90 years of CFSC's work. So we do encourage you to check that out, and Kira's going to post the link in the chat for you. And if there's photos that aren't properly ID'd, please let us know. And if there's ones where you see people and that you know, please let us know that too. Or any connection to some of the projects, particularly the older ones. We're always happy to hear people's memories of some of that work of CFSC. So the Get to Know the Friend series started in January. We've continued every month. And we're going to continue through till the end of the year. So we're really happy to do this. We hope that you will keep coming back. And tonight's speaker is Rob Hughes, who I believe is currently now the clerk of Vancouver Monthly Meeting. Yeah. And I'm just going to, I have a little bio of Rob that you will indulge me that I will read. Rob Hughes prefers he, him pronouns. He has lived, worked, and played on the stolen lands of the Coast Salish people most of his life. After Rob graduated from the University of British Columbia Faculty of Law in 1982, he articled with Legal Aid BC, where he first began representing refugee claimants and was a partner at Smith & Hughes, Canada's first LGBTQ+ law firm from 1984 until Ken Smith's retirement in 2011, working on such diverse cases as the first BC human rights complaint based on HIV discrimination, the Canadian Forces ban on homosexuality in the military, the failure to include same-sex relationships in the family class, and appearing in the Supreme Court of Canada on the reference re same-sex marriage. He has focused his practice on serving LGBTQ plus and HIV plus positive immigrants and refugees since the mid-90s. Rob is one of the founders of the Rainbow Refugee in 2000 and continues to support its work. Rob currently practices solo as outlaw immigration on the Oikwet First Nation territory, otherwise known as New Westminster, BC. And I first met Rob, I don't know how many years ago now, but I first met him at a CYM. Someone had said to me, it must be 20 years ago, someone had said to me, oh, you need to meet Rob Hughes. You'll just love Rob Hughes. And so I met him at CYM, and I did just love him, and convinced him to come and serve on the Indigenous Rights Committee at CFSC. He was concerned that he was carrying a lot of things and he wasn't sure if he had time, but we did convince him. And shortly thereafter, he became the clerk of the Indigenous Rights Committee, and he clerked that committee for many years. And he has served as an associate member of that committee for many more. And Rob is really an extraordinary capital F and small f friend. And I would say, I was trying to think, what are some few words that I can describe Rob with? And I would say that Rob shows up. Rob is active and he's engaged and he is present. From spiritual gatherings to marches for reconciliation or to reject pipelines, as well as to being in the courtroom. And Rob is just really a great guy. I've enjoyed many fun visits. I'm based in Southern Ontario, and I've enjoyed many, many fun visits and fun dinners with him and his partner, Alan, both in New West and in Vancouver. Sometimes if I would be in Vancouver for a meeting, they would drive in and get me and we could all have dinner together. And that's been a highlight for me whenever I've traveled west. So with that, I'm not going to tell you any more stories about Rob because that's why we invited him here tonight. So I'm going to hand the floor over to him, and he is going to share with us here tonight.
Thank you, Jen, for that warm and kind introduction. And you may recognize a few of the photos that will come up later in the presentation that you're in. I would like to acknowledge that I am with you tonight on the stolen lands of the Quakers First Nation here in New Westminster. And over the last year in particular, I've learned a lot more about the Quakers and why they are now the smallest, I think, band in Canada, as well as the only one without a land base. And they have an amazing chief, Rhonda Larrabee, who's I think been responsible for the resurgence of their nation here in New Westminster. Now, I had kind of thought about how to introduce my talk tonight, and it just kind of really came to me today that I couldn't let this go by without saying something about what I think many of us are feeling around the situation in Afghanistan, on top of everything else that has been going on in the world. And I hear the phrase compassion fatigue kind of being thrown around a lot. And I think that's easy to kind of fall into a sense of despondency. But I would just like to share a verse from scripture from the prophet Micah in chapter 6, verse 8, that I believe, Monica, I think you shared this during your Sunderland P. Gardner lecture, and I'd also had shared it at Quaker study a few years back because it's one of my favorite passages, and I think it's really speaks to Quakers. What doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God? So I'll repeat it again. What doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God? And I think we can all as well repeat that by saying it with to our addressing it to ourselves, and feel that a sense of connection with that divine love, that God is love, and that we are connected with that love, and there is no finite source of compassion or mercy. And so this is what I would like to kind of take in with the rest of this this talk tonight. So we can move to the first slide, Kira. Okay, this is called Following Our Ancestors' Trail. And for those of you like Ellen and Sarah, who were in my worship sharing group at yearly meeting, you will recognize this. It's also on the shirt that I am wearing. And it's, I have it as a t-shirt, but it's from a button blanket that was made by Clarissa Hudson, who's a Tlingit artist. And she did this piece in 1990. And she's written about it that the rising sun, another day of life, life everlasting. The people are the rays of the sun. Each of us has a bright light within us. The people are following a path like the path of the sun, our ancestors' trail. The salmon are our sustenance, living with the seasons, with the circle of life. And I love that image that is there, that we are the rays of the sun with that bright light within us. And among Indigenous peoples, everyone would, in any kind of talk, would say what their lineage is. And it's connecting with the ancestors and with the land that they have lived on. And we did that in our worship sharing group. And I'll just briefly describe my lineage. So we can go to the next slide. And that's my father, William or Bill Hughes, and my mother, Doreen Hughes, on their wedding day. And my mother was the daughter of immigrants from Birmingham, England. So she's half Welsh and half English in her ancestry. And my father, his father came from Irish Catholic. My grandfather, Bernard, was Catholic. And my grandmother was also of Irish descent, but Protestant. So it's kind of sometimes I think if I have a conflicted personality, maybe it's because of that ancestry. But both of those lines of the family came over during the event that's known as the famine, which so devastated Ireland. And there's a letter that's was done from my grandmother's great-grandfather James to his son Robert, where he talks that he hopes that he'd be able to hire himself out as a laborer so that he could earn money for passage for him and Robert's mother, so that they could, and this phrase has always stuck with me, leave this land of bondage. So that is my father's ancestry. Further back, on my grandmother's side, there's also some loyalist ancestry from Massachusetts. I'm trying to remember the name of the town, Andover, Massachusetts, where they had come over shortly after the Mayflower and lived on Turtle Island since that time. So that is my background. And then the next slide. And I thank my sister Deb, who's here, and known to Vancouver friends, that for giving me this photograph. So it's me, our sisters Susan and Deb, when we were younger. And then the next slide shows my mother with the addition of the fourth child, Wendy, who's she's trying very active and trying to hang on to in that photo. So we had, I think, a good childhood, but in my teens, I was, I guess, suffering from depression, and I had, going through just a difficult period. And from that, through a friend, and you can turn on the next slide, I was introduced to Christian Science. And that is Mary Baker Eddy, who was the discoverer and founder of Christian Science. And while I was kind of a bit of a social activist in early high school, and I started an environmental club, and I had gone on Greenpeace marches and demonstrations, as I became more involved in the Christian Science Church, that kind of social activism ceased. And there was, I guess, a sense of a split between spirituality and social action. And so during those years, it was very much for me on just nurturing my my spirituality. However, when I went to university, I started being kind of exposed to lots of different influences and thinking, and also was finding it increasingly difficult to reconcile my sexual orientation with my spirituality. And eventually I kind of came out to people in the Christian Science Church, and was told in clear terms that, at least from the church leadership, that I needed to be healed of my homosexuality. And I sat with that for quite some time. I had actually had, even before I had written to them, struggled over years to try to be healed, but that didn't happen. And I finally came to the understanding that it wasn't necessary for me to be healed, but it was rather for the church. And one of the things that kind of came to me during that period was a book that I had read years earlier in my teens by Jan de Hartog, The Peaceable Kingdom. And in it, he describes the encounter that Margaret Fell had with George Fox that first time, and how Fox had said, you know, what canst thou say? And that really stuck with me. And that sense that there was that I could directly connect with the divine. I didn't need to go through any kind of anything else, but other than that of inner light within me that Jan de Hertog talked about and that Fox talked of, and that kind of stayed with me, so that at that time it helped me get through that period. So that eventually, as I say, started my process of coming out. It was a long process, not an overnight kind of event. And I had left. I finally decided I had to leave the Christian Science Church, that there wasn't a place for me, and started looking for another spiritual community that I could feel that I could be myself. And so Quakers was on my list. And certainly when I came to Vancouver Friends, I found that sense of community that I needed. And I remember my first experiences there it wasn't like a warm, fuzzy kind of feeling, but it was challenging. That it made me kind of stretch myself and feel that I could grow further. So, and then one of the things I really appreciated about Friends too at that time, I was starting law school. So I was looking, I guess, for a kind of a moral compass, and that sense of listening to the light and being guided by the light, and seeing how Friends practiced and discernment and going forward with action was really.
What about next week? Would the kids be like, so I could bring one or both?
So that helped me immensely going through law school. And in law school, I was kind of finding my place, and I discovered that I was very interested in human rights, and I took all of the courses I could there on human rights. And what one professor that was particularly inspiring, Doug Sanders, I discovered had been a member of Vancouver Meeting. He taught international human rights, and he was the legal counsel for the World Council of Indigenous Peoples. So I got to hear all these wonderful stories from him about the developing area of Indigenous human rights. And it also, I had the education that informed me that human rights was all of a whole piece, that one could talk about, there wasn't like any kind of special human rights for particular groups, but it was all of one piece, interconnected. And that has stayed with me as I've worked on LGBTQ human rights issues and later on Indigenous human rights issues. And anyway, after, as you know, Jen has said, after law school, I was fortunate enough to be able to article with BC Legal Aid. I got a good grounding in refugee law, as well as other various kinds of law. Started a law practice that was focusing on advancing human rights in the LGBTQ community. However, just at that time, when we opened our doors in 1984, something else was happening. And that was what I call the first pandemic of my life, which was AIDS. And I didn't realize it at the time, but much of the work that that we had to do over the next decade was focusing on dealing with how the pandemic was affecting our community. And it was a very difficult period of time. I lost many close friends, co-workers, people that I had loved and dated. It was just a very difficult period. However, one of the things that was also happening too was that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms came into effect, and particularly the charter, you know, the equality rights section, and so that that was a boon, you know, to our work, and it was also the recognition too in Section 35 of you know, forming a basis for Indigenous rights. Also, in 1985, I had the opportunity to work with an ecumenical young adult organization called Young Christians for Global Justice in a work camp in a Gitson Reserve at Kispiox. And that was, for me, kind of the first time that I had that, you know, that experience of being able to really interact more and see what I you know, hadn't really spent any time on a reserve before, other than just I think there was one trip I made when I was volunteering for a lawyer in the Aboriginal law course that I was doing some research for her, and went to a local reserve. But that really opened my eyes. And the week before we went up there, we had some intensive presentations about kind of what to expect. And there was one woman who shared with us about her experiences in residential school. And that was an eye-opener for me. I just, you know, felt like, wow, I had not heard anything about this before. Even in my Aboriginal law course, it was just not talked about. And you could see just how painful and traumatic that was, and the effect that it had on the community too when I was up there. So that was kind of that kind of stayed with me. Later on, as I say, there was, as Janice alluded to, I became involved in same-sex marriage issue, and I was wearing many hats, kind of at that time. Now, I remember going to a consultation that Queen's University had sponsored in 1998. And it was bringing together academics and activists and lawyers to kind of strategize and decide what did we want to achieve and how were we going to kind of get there. And at that time, there was considerable debate in the LGBTQ community about whether marriage was in fact something that we really wanted for ourselves, and that there were some people who, many people who saw it as a kind of antiquated patriarchal institution that we should just avoid like the plague. And there was also some provinces that were pushing for domestic partner registrations. And so we were looking, is this a model that, we should go forward with? Anyway, the consensus was by the end of that conference that we did need to fight for equal marriage rights, that anything less would be treating us as second-class citizens, and that although not everyone would necessarily want to get married, that they should have the option. It should be a personal choice for each and every couple. So I was on a continuing meeting of Ministry and Council in that period in the late 90s and the early aughts. And at that time, we started considering same-sex marriage. Oh, and also something else had changed in my life. So you can go to the next slide. So in 1998, I had reconnected with Alan Hunt. We have a long and complicated relationship going back all the way to 1985. But from 1999 on, we have been a couple and living together. So I had then some skin in the game, so to speak, with the same-sex marriage issue. And through CMNC, we participated in an interfaith coalition for same-sex marriage in 2002. And then later did a brief to the Standing Committee on Same-Sex Marriage in Vancouver on April 2nd, 2003. And let's see, it was after that, I think there was a general kind of consensus and among CYM and CFSC that it would be better for this concern to be carried by CFSC. And so there was a same-sex marriage working group that was formed, and it all participated in what was then the Religious Coalition for Equal Marriage Rights. And it reported to the CFSC executive. So I know this whole concern is coming up again, or has come up again at yearly meeting. It's good for us to kind of look back to what work was done at that time. I think we can, although times have changed since then, and we can look at going further. There was, friends were quite involved, in the struggle for equal marriage, and that should be remembered. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so this is the first legal Quaker same-sex marriage. I think that happened anywhere in the world. So that was Alan and me with our family and friends, both small f and large f, around us at the Vancouver meeting on May 1st, 2004. And several months later, let's see, that was in May. So in October, I was before the Supreme Court of Canada in the same-sex marriage reference, and arguing, not representing friends, but wearing another hat. And I could say to the court that I was the only lawyer that was before them that was actually in a same-sex marriage. So of course, the rest now is history, and we can go on to the next slide. Okay, this, when I married Alan, I didn't only just marry Alan, but I married into a really wonderful Hilsuk family that was just an amazing bunch of people. And I've learned from them that we hear so much of the pain and trauma that has happened with things like the the residential schools and the 60s scoop and everything else that has gone on. But I have learned that Indigenous families have been very strong and resilient, all through this. And that sense of family connection and connections with community and with their ancestors, the revitalization of culture and language is just very inspiring, and I'm just feel so privileged to have been welcomed into the Hunt family. Okay. Oh, and I guess you can go to the next slide. And this is showing, I think, some of the next generation coming up. So on my, I guess it's my left, is Eden Robinson. She is an acclaimed Indigenous author who's one of her first novels, Monkey Beach, has been turned into a film, which her sister Carla, who's beside her, Carla's a journalist. She's worked for CBC and has produced the Monkey Beach film. And her two children, Sam and Lena. And Lena's just, we just were out with them last 2 weeks ago, I guess. She's starting a Indigenous film course at Capilano College this September. So it'll be good to see that she's much closer to us. So that kind of brings us up more to, the encouraging, this generation, I think, and coming generations are being able to move forward. And there's some exciting things happening in Indigenous communities. And I'm just so proud that to be associated with CFSC and being part of furthering that work. Things like the Reconciliation Fund, that is supporting communities that are taking initiatives to reclaim language and culture. Oh, next slide too, sorry. This was a workshop I participated in 2013 that was sponsored by Reconciliation Canada. So I'm the kind of the green leprechaun in the center, and then just beside me is Chief Robert Joseph, who is the the ambassador and kind of the leader of Reconciliation Canada. And this was kind of a week-long workshop that they organized that brought together people who, there's roughly an equal a number of two-spirited Indigenous people with other members of the LGBTQ communities. So it was a learning experience, and Chief Bobby Joe's daughter Karen is sitting in the chair there, and she identifies as two-spirited, and shared like her experiences and in growing up, basically on reserve with the whole kind of baggage that came from the residential schools, and how that impacted like her father dealing with her coming out and so on. So it really was helpful to me to hear these stories and relate that to what Alan had to go through growing up, and understand that. So next slide. Okay, I said, Jen, there would be this is one where we did have the pleasure to have dinner with Jen. That was in November 2015, when she was out attending, I think it was a conference that was at the on the Musqueam Reserve, wasn't it? That, yeah. And let's see. So next slide is okay, and that one was taken at Cranberry Commons, and I see a number of friends, from Cranberry Commons here tonight. So Ruth, among others, and so there's beside me is Heather Noon, who was a member of QIRC at the time, and Jan, and Paul Joff, who I see is with us tonight. And Paul is a beloved associate member of QIRC, and he and Jan were doing a presentation for Vancouver meeting on that visit. And I am now, since I have finished my term on QIRC, also an associate member. And I value that ongoing connection with the committee. It's not just an honorary title, but associate members are, asked to do work and support, the committee's work. I'm currently clerking an ad hoc committee to draft queries on reconciliation for CYM. So I think, QIRC is a committee that has kind of pioneered the use of associate members. And I think now that to be able to kind of expand what the reach and scope of committee work can undertake. And let's see, I think there's just one more slide. Okay, no, there might be two. Yes, that one was, let's see, 2017. That was probably, I think, my last committee meeting. Oh, no, maybe not. No, it was, I think, wasn't it? Anyway, it was at Friend's house. So in these pre-COVID times, when we were meeting there, and before we started to expand and meet in other places, so that we could, kind of not just have all of the work and being able to connect better with friends by going to other places across the yearly meeting. So that kind of, I think, brings me to a close as to what I wanted to share. I also wanted to kind of give a shout out to the CFSC staff for the amazing work that they do. And an example of that recently was when I was responding to a petition that had been circulating in New Westminster against a proposal for social housing for urban Indigenous people and Swahili speaking peoples that was going to be built. And there was just this kind of not in my backyard, response through a petition. Matt Legg was giving me some guidance, on that. And I'm happy to say that there was that campaign to support the Aboriginal Land Trust was met with success. There was a very intense city council meeting that I think I was speaker number 58 of something like 120 speakers, and the end result was that city council unanimously voted in favor of the project going ahead. So they should be breaking ground next year. So I will just leave it at that and invite questions from all of the audience.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for your stories and taking us there. I know you also had shared when we organized the Quaker study at CYM several years ago. Now I don't even remember. That was in Ontario, and It was that was a great event as well. And it's always interesting to hear people's background and how they came both to Friends and how they came to various pieces of work that they do. So thanks for that, all of that. And we do have time, friends, to have some discussion. And as Kira said, you are welcome to either raise your hand, put something in the chat, wave at us, just unmute yourself. We're happy to take questions. And I see that Margaret Slavin is hot off the mark with her hand up. So I'm going to call on Margaret for the first question.
Thanks, Jennifer, and Rob, thanks for the whole presentation. I perked right up when you said that you were the clerk of the committee that's working on the query for CYM around reconciliation matters and whatever you're coming up with, because it was, I think, our meeting here in Peterborough that
Yep.
started that process. One of our members came back from Australia where they had one of their main queries having to do with settler Indigenous relations, and we worked over it and sent it out, and everybody was horrified by it because it was not okay, but we were doing our best, and we were very relieved when it got passed over to you in this ad hoc committee. But I hadn't heard anything lately, and I was beginning to wonder whether it had fallen apart. So can you fill us in any further on where that's at? Because I think it would be very helpful for our meetings to have a query.
Yes, no, I agree. I think that's,
Yeah.
and I applaud Peterborough Friends for bringing that concern forward to the early meeting. And it has, as I say, we've gotten to the point where our group, our ad hoc committee has a draft. I mean, we have submitted a draft. It's before discipline review committee. And I'm sure hoping that we can move this forward and see that we can include this into our faith and practice.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about this.
I can send you, I suppose, the draft. I mean, it's and I know in our meeting we've actually been working sometimes with the queries, and I guess that's because as clerk I've been reading them before our business meeting.
Yeah, it got kind of sidetracked onto, what's our process in CYM for having queries at all? Because we, of course, we're using Britain's queries. But yes, in fact, the friend who initially raised it was willing and did put her name forward to receive any drafts that you have. So but send them to me as clerk and I'll make sure that it gets out to the meeting. We would be very interested. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Alina, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I was curious at some point in your talk, Rob, you said that CYM and CFSC came to an understanding that it would be CFSC who would bring the same-sex marriage issue back to CYM for consideration, and then.
Oh, it was carrying that concern kind of with some of the outer work that we were doing. I mean, there was ultimately the minute that on same-sex marriage that was approved at CYM, I think in 2005 at that yearly meeting. But this was prior to that. There was considerable kind of engagement with the kind of in outside of Friends, working with ecumenical and other organizations, groups that were in support of same-sex marriage. And I think that, that was a, kind of a important role, and CFSC was able to kind of take the ball on that.
Cool.
Yeah, and I know like Jane Orion, she was part of that working group, and there were events that were held in various cities across Canada. We had one in Vancouver, there was Toronto, I think in Halifax, I think Ottawa as well had one, and yeah, so there was a lot going on at that time.
And I think there's a new initiative, I think, is it Cowichan Valley, which is the monthly meeting?
Yes, and Cowichan Valley has brought forward a minute. So this concern is really still, CYM is now looking to see how much further can we go. I mean, the minute that we approved in 2005 was where we were at in 2005.
Right.
Okay, now what can we say? What canst thou say? At this time.
I'm beginning to see the process in a bigger picture here. Thank you.
Well, while other people are thinking of things, I'll just share a brief story which illustrates some of Rob's work with CFSC and also the nature of the way that synergies and partnerships come together. And I think that now it's something that's pretty well known, but I don't remember how many years ago it was when the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, which is one of the Indigenous nations that is fighting the pipeline coming into their territory in British Columbia. And they turns out that a lawyer that was working with them had a former relationship with Rob through some legal work, but also from Rob helping him come to Canada. And so there was this past connection there. And so Paul and I were in Vancouver for other meetings. And so this other lawyer was able to make, and who was, I think, doing their environmental work, made the arrangements. And Paul, Rob, and I all went over to meet with Tsleil-Waututh, some of their leadership, to discuss how the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples might be useful to them in their work that they were doing to try and stop the pipeline. And so all of those threads sort of came together in the time that the group of us spent in their offices. But at the end of it, one of the leaders said to us, "Oh, we're having a cultural gathering, I think like in a couple of weeks, and you're welcome to come back." And of course, Paul and I were leaving British Columbia, so we weren't going to be there, but Rob and Alan went. And so, and Rob took that invitation very seriously. And Rob and Alan went, and I'm guessing, were you the only people not from the community there?
There were a few people outside, but yeah, but it was pretty much the Tsleil-Waututh, and Alan and I went, and it was a gathering to honor the elders, and we brought Alan's mom with us, so it was yeah.
So that was lovely. That's what I mean when I say that Rob shows up.
But a lot of the work that CFSC does is very much, kind of relationship based. And, I think that makes it much more richer, that it's that we can draw on, this network of people that we know and have a relationship with to carry forward the work.
Hi, Bert. Bert, do you have a question for Rob?
Yeah, it's a sort of a question. I was thinking about subtle learning through relationships when they're utterly unexpected and unplanned. I don't know who arranged the sleeping arrangements, but I think it was at Sedberg at a yearly meeting of 1 August. I shared a room in the residence with Rob Hughes. And as is often the case when people share a room, especially if they're strangers, there will be, when both are in bed, there's just a kind of a pre-sleep conversation that takes place. It kind of peters out as the more tired one drops off to sleep and doesn't respond anymore. But my entire upbringing and life had absolutely no kind of awareness of the realm of gender variation. And Rob was just so candid and natural as we talked about our growing up and our sort of childish or youthful explorations that he, unknowingly, I'm sure, he taught me so much. And nobody knows what good effects come from that kind of subtle, unplanned, innocent, but spiritually grounded encounter. And so the simple act of attending CYM and sharing a room with a stranger for the 7 or 8 days of the meeting had a powerful impact on me. I don't know if it had much of an impact on Rob, but the fact is that there's a tendril of knowledge and of relationship that exists that helped me when our meeting was preparing its own minute on same-sex marriage prior to the emergence of the minute of record of yearly meeting. So there was a contribution to that work, and I'm very grateful to Rob, and I'd be glad if he cared to comment, but he doesn't have to, of course.
No, I remember that yearly meeting, and I didn't know that I had any part in helping you with later with you know, understanding better the issues around sexual orientation and gender identity. I don't consider myself anything more than just, you know, a single individual, and everyone's story is different, and mine may not be exactly, you know, the same as someone else's who is also LGBTQ, but yeah, I just was glad to be able to have you as a roommate then. Oh, also too, was there another slide, Kira, that I had left? I can't remember.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. I have one more, so I'm
Yeah.
going to put it up.
Show that one, yeah. Okay, so this one, and there are basically Vancouver friends, although there's Genevieve Singleton Bolster in the background there, but Vancouver friends, and this is a pipeline protest up on Burnaby Mountain, and I just wanted to you know, thank all of the friends in my meeting for their support and the amazing work that they do. You know, we have friends that really do, you know, listen to the light and follow their discernment to take action that continues to inspire me. And so they all need to be recognized too. And I'd also like to call out the people in the Wednesday, for me it's morning, but the Wednesday meeting for worship that CFSC has been holding since the pandemic has started. It has been such a blessing, and you know, kind of helps get me through some of the difficult times when things can get, you know, very frustrating, as they have, like this past week with I've had two gay men from Afghanistan that I have been in communication with. One of whom is I've lost communication with, and it's just been I so much appreciate the support from that group.
And that gives me a nice segue to tell people that, and then I'll call on Paul. But for those who don't have it, Kira could put the link in the chat. Anyone who wants to join us every Wednesday morning, we have a meeting for worship on Zoom, and it's at 10:30 in Eastern. And so 7:30 a.m. if you're in the Pacific time zone, 8:30 if you're in Mountain, 9:30 if you're in Winnipeg, etc. So we would love to see more of you. And now I'm gonna call on Paul, I think has a question for Rob.
Hi, Paul.
Paul, I think you may be on mute.
Yeah. You've got to unmute yourself, Paul.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry
Yep.
about that. Yeah, it's not so much a question as that this year really is a special year. As probably most, if not all, know, we got through the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's now law in Canada. Canada does set a precedent around the world. And the Quakers were, I can think of all the years, and I haven't been with you since your beginning, but in all the years, the Quaker support was really solid. And it wasn't easy those years. And to achieve this declaration, not only for Indigenous peoples in Canada who were actively involved, but Indigenous peoples around the world. And that's so huge. And Rob, of course, has had a number of victories with a number of different issues, diverse issues. But it's really important to celebrate when victories come, and they're not victories for the moment, they're victories to build on, because there are always other layers, and there are always other challenges, and it requires sustained effort. And the one thing about Quakers is that there has been sustained effort. And you come here with diverse points of views and you contribute in different ways, but together it's really a cohesive group and voice that I've always appreciated. And I appreciated tonight listening to some of your different comments on the issues. So I just want to take this moment to say what a privilege it's been and a pleasure to be, you know, associated with you, and as we continue this work. And with that type of history that you've had, like Jennifer has told me about the internationally, who received the big prize at the time. When was it, in 1946?
47.
It was the Nobel Peace Prize.
In 1947.
1947. These are great events. This is another example of bringing people together for peace. And peace can be defined in so many different ways. There's peace when people know that their rights and who they are recognized and respected. And that brings a certain peace. And with that peace, people can contribute more to others and for themselves. So there's so much going here and the dynamics are so positive. I just wanted to take this moment to thank you and also recognize you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. And I see that Pete has his hand up. Pete?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I noticed in one of your slides, a picture of Phyllis Fisher. And Phyllis Fisher must compete strongly with you for the member who has served longest on QIRC. And not to take anything away from any of the other wonderful speakers we've had and will have. I think it's too bad that we haven't had get to know the friend for Phyllis Fisher.
Yes, she is dearly missed. She used to faithfully show up to QIRC meetings when we had them at Friend's house in Toronto, and yeah, she is sorely missed.
Well, I see that we're getting close to the end of our time together. Oh, let me just see. I think we've got something in the chat. I just want to see. Oh, yes, Barbara thanking Rob in the chat. And I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming. And I know that people are this far along in COVID, people are quite well zoomed out, but it also does seem like we will be continuing to Zoom for some time. And in that vein, the Get to Know Thee Friend series will continue on September the 30th, which again, we are the final Thursday in each month. So on Thursday, September the 30th, we will have a Get to Know Thee Friend with Monica Walters-Field, newly from her SPG fame, if such a thing can exist. And so please join us on September the 30th for a discussion with Monica. And I just want to say before we close that, of course, you know, CFSC's work and all the work that CFSC does, some of what has been described here tonight, is only possible because of generous financial support from individuals such as yourselves. And it is, CFSC has managed through 90 years and through a pandemic to carry on faithfully doing the work that we do because individual people financially support us. And it is as our 90th anniversary, where we're doing extra events. And we would like very much if you can help us to reach our extra fundraising goal of an extra $90,000 for 90 years of service. And Kira can post a chat in the link to show you ways that people can donate to CFSC, because there's a variety of ways to do that. And if you have any other ideas for Get to Know Thee Friend, and you can get in touch with Kira. If you have any feedback on tonight, you can get in touch with Kira. As she said, she's not going to give you any technical advice. But if you have any other questions or thoughts for Kira, she'd be happy to share that with you. And, you know, it's always such a pleasure. And I will also say what Rob had said about the Wednesday morning meeting is always such a pleasure, and seeing many of you there on Wednesday mornings, it is helpful. And in all the odd ways that we continue to do our work in the times that we are currently living. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming. And Rob, do you have any last words you'd like to share with friends?
Well, just again, not to be stressed out by what's going on in these current times, and all we can do is you know, follow that words of the prophet Micah to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God.